The creator of Wonder Woman was a man named William Marston. Now, in reading the Wonder Woman comic, though, you'll see the name Charles Moulton given. That's because he wanted a kind of pen name for when he wrote it. That was common. His full name was William Moulton Marston, so he just took his middle name, made it the family name. Charles Gaines, we'll talk about Charles Gaines' son later on in another lecture. He was the one who helped support this idea, so he made him the first name, so Charles Moulton. Charles Moulton was a psychologist, right? Charles Moulton was trained as a psychologist. I'll say William Marston, rather. He was a psychologist. And one thing about the social sciences, I think especially psychology and sociology, was that he had a deep desire to change society, to improve society, right? That was one of the goals of psychological science, and still is, right? We're going to help people live happier, healthier lives by paying attention to mental health and kind of thinking about things like this. So for him, comics was a way to do that. It was also a way to earn money. And for a long time, he actually had trouble making a living. I'll mention that more later. But what's interesting about him, right? He wanted to use comics to fulfill his desire to change society and also to try and earn money. So one thing, I'm going to read some quotes from him, right? These are interesting, and this is what I mean about trying to understand something within its historical context to kind of complicate Wonder Woman. So when I say he wants to change society, and he wants to do through comics, how does he want to change society? How are comics going to help with that? So here are some quotes from Marston. Give males, now I added the word males to make the quote make sense, an alluring woman stronger themselves to submit to, and they'll be proud to become her willing slaves. Now, again, that's kind of a curious thing to say, but let's try and get some more context. The only hope for peace, and this is another quote, is to teach people who are full of pep and unbound force to enjoy being bound. Only when the control of self by others is more pleasant than the unbound assertion of self in human relationships can we hope for a stable, peaceful human society. Giving to others, being controlled by them, submitting to other people cannot possibly be enjoyable without a strong erotic element. So, going back to the comics, you can see maybe why he has some of what he has there. Wonder Woman is psychological propaganda for the new type of woman who should, I believe, rule the world. There isn't love enough in the male organism to run this planet peacefully. Woman's body contains twice as many love-generating organs and endocrine mechanisms as the male. What woman lacks is the dominance or self-assertive power to put over and enforce her love desires. I have given Wonder Woman this dominant force, but have kept her loving, tender, maternal, and feminine in every way. And so I you've seen her strength. This is interesting. I think kind of very feminine image. If we think of that in terms of traditional gender roles, there's nothing in the world so dear as children. I love every one of them, and they all need milk, the perfect food. Strong, healthy children today means a safe, happy America tomorrow. Right. So this is fascinating in a sense, because what is he trying to say here is that it's kind of like, well, women are awesome, but they're lacking something that prevents them from taking their true role in society, which is to govern men. I don't know how to categorize that idea. And it's fascinating because in some ways he's holding to traditional ideas about women being more caring and nurturing, and then trying to find like a biological basis for them to say that this is just how women are. So again, it's hard just to say, is this just feminism? Right? I think there's more to it than that. Now, one other thing we have to think about in terms of understanding Marston is his family life. So this is William Marston. This is his wife, Elizabeth, and this is his lover, Olive Byrne. This is a neighbor who they were friends with. So what happened, and there's different ways of telling the story, right? William Marston was married to Elizabeth. They were deeply in love. Marston was actually trying to come up with the idea of a comic book character, and Elizabeth was the one who said, make it a woman. And while Marston was at Tufts University, his assistant, a graduate student named Olive, and him became lovers. And they then asked permission from Elizabeth to let Olive come and live with them. And there's different ways of telling this story that I've heard. One is that Elizabeth was very upset that not only was her husband committing, from a traditional perspective, was committing adultery, but was asking that the woman come to live with them. And finally did agree on condition that basically Elizabeth would do all the housework and later take care of all the children, so that she could pursue her own studies. That's one way I've heard the story. The other way is that she did it to make Elizabeth allowed Olive to come in to make her husband happy, and later on they came to live happily together. And I believe it's one of the grandchildren who said they were like sisters. So it's interesting again, because this kind of complicates things, because if the first story is true, that Elizabeth was very against this until she figured out, well, I'll just make Olive do all the work. It's not so much a story about equality and freedom and openness. That is how some people tell it. Similarly, if you look at it the kind of other way around, then it's a different kind of story, right? Where if Elizabeth was very welcoming initially, and then this relationship between them grew. The thing that I'm fascinated about, I wonder what would happen if Olive would have brought a boyfriend and said, "Can he live with us too?" Because that would have told us a lot about Marston's ideas of equality, right? Because then you have this guy who is trying to argue that really women should be in charge, and then he basically it's kind of like he's setting up a harem. I don't know if that's fair to say, but it's kind of like, I'm just looking at this, I'm like, I wonder if he would have been willing to let a guy come into this. In any case, this is very complex, but remember, and this will be very important when we come to the idea of what do we do with comics, that people didn't realize it at the time as a wider audience, but this is someone who's trying to remake society into his own understanding of how the world should be, and he wants to use comics to do that. So we have to keep that in mind when we talk about this argument about censoring comics. So what was this all for? What were we trying to do here? Like I said, it's easy to just look at things shallowly. It's easy to try and make things say what you want them to say. And things are more complex than that. And I think that Wonder Woman is a great way to show it, because it's so obvious, the closer we look, that there is a lot going on here. There is a lot to examine in individual panels. You can go to deep detail there, but you also have to consider the context of the story, not simply within a single issue, but throughout the series. Wonder Woman has a very complex plot structure that we didn't go into detail here, but there's a lot going on. And you also have to consider who William Marston was, what he was trying to do, and the circumstances he faced. Like I said, he was often hard up for money and was trying to figure out how to support his growing family. He had children by 2 children by his wife and 2 children by his, I think she's called a partner on Wikipedia, but by Olive. So he had 4 kids to support. And trying to make sense of him, what he was trying to do, that can lead to a great paper. I want to stress, though, you should also choose something you're comfortable with. I find studying Wonder Woman to be very uncomfortable for a variety of reasons, which I think you could just see I felt uncomfortable talking about a lot of these things. And I think it's important to go over them. If you're teaching a class on history of comics and animation, I think it would be irresponsible to skip Wonder Woman. She's too important. And as we'll see later on, she's really, really important as we continue. But you also need to do something you're kind of comfortable with. And I thought I would stop with this image because this is, what can I say? I like this image, right? I think it's very sweet. So, complex, but I'll end on a nice, sweet image. I will see you all in the next lecture.